Hello friends, my name is Holden Zhang, a Tulsa University professor. Last year, I posted a YouTube video convincing Atlantis to show the exact location of Atlantis based on the hydrology and the water cycle of the Atlas Basin during the Green Sahara period. In this video, I'll present detailed and precise evidence from the pyramid texts to confirm the Atlantis location and talk about the significance. The pyramid texts are the oldest original Egyptian religious documents about the afterlife. They laid the foundation and the core structure for the Egyptian religion, which later evolved and had far-reaching influences. They are sacred, accurate, and repetitive. The Egyptian hieroglyph Akhet means a horizon or the place where the sun rises, associated with recreation and rebirth. Akhet also means inundation. The Egyptian sun god worshipping traditions and the sun disk symbols are all related to Akhet. The Akhet is the one and foremost sacred place of ancient Egyptian religion. It appeared in the pyramid texts more than 300 times. It is the place where the gods are born and take their throne. It is also the place where the deceased is reborn with the gods after purification. The pyramid texts portray a detailed, specific, and vivid picture of archification or spiritual rebirth centered at the Akhet. It includes the positions, shapes, depth, colors, temperatures, inundation events, vegetation, and the salinity of the water bodies. It also describes the human activities of religion, irrigation, farming, and ferry. This video will show that all these details fit together to this real place, the exact location I figured out last year for the legendary city Atlantis. The quotes in this video are all from Alan's book, using the volume names and the section numbers in the first edition, cross-checked with his second edition. Alan's book includes translations of the pyramid texts found in the pyramids of King Unes, King Tati, King Pepi I, King Marinai, King Pepi II, and his wife Neith, spanning from 2353 to 2152 BC. The Atlas Basin is in East Algeria and South Tunisia. In the pyramid texts, it is called the Big Enclosure. The two terminal megalakes are called the Jackal Lake and the Stock Lake. Water from the Jackal Lake flowed to the Stock Lake, which further discharged to the Mediterranean Sea if there was a surplus. According to the pyramid text, archification is a process of rebirth with gods and becoming arch. It involves activities across this area. The deceased received his abundant provisions from the Marsh of Reeds, becoming clean with the cool water from the Jackal Lake, and is given the new birth at the Akhet. After rebirth, the newborn ark and the sun god Atum will enter the Jackal Lake, which represents the starry sky. The lakes and the canals each have multiple names to define their specific properties. The western lake was called the Jackal Lake due to its shape like a jackal head if one stands on the high-rising Atlas mountain and looks at it from the north. In the Egyptian pantheon, the jackal god Anubis is one of the most popular gods, but no relevant myth involved him. He must be the personification of the Jackal Lake for its purification, protection, and guidance in the afterlife of the deceased. The Jackal Lake was called the Great Green, which was most likely the origin of Osiris' symbol color. Osiris is the god of afterlife and the resurrection. He is also honored as the foremost of the Westerners. The Egyptian term green covers a spectrum from green to blue, contrasting to the marsh of turquoise. On the east, this green to blue color spectrum reflects a water depth change from its shallow shelf to its deeper central area with the depths of about 70 meters. When the water from this deeper Jackal Lake flowed into the shallow Stock Lake, people would feel the sharp coolness of the current. Therefore, the Jekyll Lake got the name Cool Waters. It was called the Nurse Lake because it provided the nurturing water to the Marsh of Reeds, which was later converted to farmland. It was called the Lake of Life or Marsh of Life because it was the place to become clean and get rebirth. It was called the Spread Lake because it spread out from east to west. It was called the Great Lake because it was much bigger than the Stock Lake. It was called the Dwak Lake since it was the place to become clean and rise with God. It was called the Sky since it was the place the sun god Atum would go every evening to rest. Generally, it was called the God's Lake or Shu's Lake. Shu is Atlas in Greek mythology. The eastern megalake was called the Stork Lake since its shape looks like a stork. It was likely the original inspiration for the bird deity Banu, associated with sun, recreation, and rebirth. It appears in all the illustrations of the Marsh of Reeds in the Book of the Dead. Likewise, this lake was called the Goose Lake. It was called the Marsh of the Beetles as associated with the sunrise. Water in the Stock Lake was very shallow and gave a turquoise color, so it was called the Marsh of Turquoise. The lake bed is extremely flat as confirmed by recent satellite measurement. When the water was drained lower at the later stage, reeds flourished and spread widely across the lake. Therefore, it got its prominent name, the Marsh of Reeds. It is a place where the deceased got supplies and rejuvenation before rising with the god. So it was called the Marsh of Rest, the Marsh of Offering, and the Marsh of Ascenders. The Stork Lake was frequently called the Horus Eye, since its shape vividly resembled the human eye with long external canthus. This lake must be the original inspiration of Horus Eye, one of the most popular Egyptian amulets. It was called the place of Malachite after the lake was converted to farmland. The grain crops and the surrounding turquoise shallow waters were viewed as a field of malachite. The name Green Marsh also indicates the conversion of the lake into a farmland. The canal connecting the Jekyll Lake and the Stock Lake was called the Nurse Canal, since it released the nurturing water from the Nurse Lake to the Marsh of Reeds. It was named the Gorge Canal, probably because it was narrow and deep at the ridge between the two lakes. A water gate was set at this narrow gorge to control the water flow to smooth inundation and to provide the water for irrigation and ferry. The name Natural Canal for this watercourse might reflect the water salinity increase due to the water cycle collapse in the Atlas Basin. The canal was also called the Guide Canal or the Canal of Cool Water. The name Looking Canal must be related to the magnificent view of sunrise from the east end of the canal where the Akhet is located. A person standing at the narrow gorge would see a sunrise exactly like the Akhet motif. The canal around the Marsh of Reeds was called the Winding Canal. Since the water in the Marsh of Reeds was very shallow, a canal was excavated off the shoreline to do ferry and irrigation. Later, this canal must have been dug deeper to drain the water from the Marsh of Reeds to form farmland. It was sometimes called the Canal of the Goose due to the goose-like shape of the lake. It was also called the To and From Canal. The Winding Canal was also symbolized as a mouth, and the Akhet was located on its lip. The strait between the Stock Lake and the narrow entrance was called the Apis Canal due to its shape of an Apis bullhorn. In this pyramid text recitation, both the inundation and the great immersion refer to the Akhet. The Lord of the Sunlight is the sun god Atum. The nourishment is the cool water from the Jekyll Lake. The Green Marsh is the Stock Lake. Both the Akhet and the Stock Lake are downstream of the watergate located at the ridge. This is the surface profile of the current lake bed of the Stock Lake. After about 5,700 years weathering, the area along the shore is still clearly showing a lower profile, indicating an ancient man-made canal around the Stock Lake. At the Akhet location, the crescent-shaped external L is still visible. The close-up image shows a clear round profile having the same diameter of the Atlantis citadel given by Plato. This is Atlanteans dynasty depiction of the paradise the deceased would enter after passing judgment. He is shown paddling his own boat on the top panel, which is labeled as the Marsh of Offerings. On the second panel, he harvests barley and drives oxen over the threshing floor, and he is plowing with oxen on the third, which is labeled as the Marsh of Reeds. At the bottom, the god's throne is located on the lower island, which is the Akhet. Passing the narrow canal, two boats are ready for him to join the sun god in the Duat Lake. The Atlantis inundation occurred around 11,000 years ago according to Plato. The immersion was catastrophic for the island city but had almost no effect on the countryside. People moved and the Atlantic civilization advanced to new heights. The environment described in the pyramid text corresponds to the time right before the desertification started. In between, there were about 5,000 years, and many events could have occurred. Worshipping the creator sun god was certainly developed in the Atlas Basin. The landscape and the water bodies around the Akhet was the natural setting for this inspiration. The sun rose every morning from the Marsh of the Beetles as the new creation. It is set every evening into the vast Duat Lake, where the vast and calm water mirrored the starry sky to form a crystal dreamy view during the night. The deceased would join the gods and become one of the imperishable stars. The Akhet was the place to ascend with the gods. Its shape symbolized the sun, and it had emerged and rising again in its own history. Clearly, the Akhet and Atlantis were the same sacred city proven by their physical profiles, hydrological environment, and anthropological relationships. In this pyramid text recitation, the Great Black Wall reflects one of the three stone colors mentioned by Plato on Atlantis. The Great Green is the Atlantic Sea for Atlantis. The Great Round and Encircled and Round describe the circular Atlantis citadel. The circuit that surrounds the external isles is the circular canal around the city, which is a unique feature of Atlantis. The external isles are the remains of the Atlantis rain-shaped islands. After the Great Immersion, the river broke into the ring structure of the citadel, and long-time water flow eroded it into isolated isles. The big waters that perish must refer to the Great Immersion that destroyed Atlantis. This recitation clearly tells that Atlantis or the Akhet is inside the circular canal. Now we know that the inundation meaning of the Akhet was originally from the Atlas Basin. Specifically, it traces back to the inundation of Atlantis about 11,000 years ago. This historical event must have been deeply engraved in the Atlantean memory. Therefore, the Akhet got its reflective nicknames, including the Great Immersion, the Great Inundation, or simply the Inundation, as recorded in the pyramid texts. In the previous video, I suggested that the Atlantis inundation was due to an earthquake-caused landslide at the narrow entrance, blocking the water outflow. The blockage and the continuous upstream inflow quickly raised the water level of the lakes to a height which submerged the island city Atlantis. This recitation in the pyramid text seems to reflect the memory of this event. Gab represents Earth, and Gab quakes implies an earthquake due to the surge of the fierce lake. The Shu's wall, or Atlas city, namely Atlantis, was destroyed. The Akhet is the place where the gods are born. In Egyptian religion, Atum, the sun god, created Shu or Atlas, and Tefnut, who produced the other gods. This agrees with Plato's account on Atlantis, from where Atlas ruled his kingdom. Diodorus of Sicily recorded a tale about the Atlanteans as the most civilized men among the inhabitants of those regions who dwelt in the prosperous country and possessed great cities. It was among them, we are told, that the mythology places the birth of the gods in the regions which lie along the shore of the ocean, in this respect agreeing with those among the Greeks. The Elysian fields for afterlife in Greek religion clearly corresponds to the Marsh of Reeds. According to Homer, the Elysian fields was located on the western edge of the earth by the stream of the Oceanus. Hesiod also mentioned the fortunate isles or the isles of the blessed, which must be the Akhet. The Atlanteans used the canals and water gates to regulate flash floods, to provide irrigation for farming, and to maintain a navigable canal system for ferry. The pyramid texts portray a vivid scene of sailing to the Akhet from the east entrance. The water outflow had to be blocked to elevate the water level so that boats could ferry on it. About 5,800 years ago, Atlanteans converted the vast fertile Marsh of Reeds into farmland by draining the water from this area and digging the Atlas Canal deeper. A canal network might have been excavated across the Marsh of Reeds for irrigation and ferry. This was a marvelous hydraulic project, and this area must have given unprecedented agricultural productivity due to the rich lakebed sediment and surface water control. The abundant green farmland and the surrounding turquoise shallow waters were viewed as the field of malachite. The Atlas mountain range has a strong rainshed effect, which creates desert if not compensated. The water surface area of the Jackal Lake and the Stork Lake together was about 30,000 square kilometers during the Atlantis time, roughly the size of Belgium. This giant water surface area plus the surrounding vegetation could generate water vapor more than enough to eliminate the rainshed effect of the Atlas mountain and maintain the Green Sahara. The Atlas Basin is a standalone catchment and has its own water cycle dictated by a nonlinear relationship between precipitation and evaporation. When precipitation is higher than evaporation, there is a runoff surplus flowing out to the Mediterranean Sea, and the ecosystem is healthy. However, if precipitation decreases below evaporation, the lake level will drop. The smaller lake surface area gives lower local relative humidity and further reduces precipitation. The water cycle will get into a self-propelled destabilizing process and quickly move to a desert condition. When Atlanteans converted the Marsh of Reeds into farmland by draining water to the Mediterranean Sea, they significantly reduced the water surface area. Through this hydrological operation, they were unknowingly making a deadly mistake, triggering a collapse of the water cycle over the Atlas Basin. The water cycle collapse led to a rapid desertification in the basin over a very short time. Because of its leading position for the westerlies and trade wind, the Atlas Basin desertification inflicted a breach to the Green Sahara and caused the deterioration of all downwind areas, including North Africa, West Asia, and the Mediterranean region. The pyramid texts gave signs of desertification around the Akhet. The lakes were called the lichen basins. This is a clear indication of desertification and freshwater deterioration. This recitation mentions the growth of thornbush, which is typical vegetation in dry land. The water in the Nurse Lake was called Natrine water, and the Nurse Canal was called Natrine Canal. These names might reflect the water salinity increase in the Jackal Lake. Dust flux data obtained from the marine cores extracted at these four locations are the direct indicator of climate changes in the Atlas Basin, since they are in the downwind area with the trade winds. This data clearly show an abrupt desertification process around 5,700 years ago. This desertification process forced an unprecedented exodus from the Atlas Basin about 5,600 years ago. On the north side, Atlanteans likely found a foothold on some Mediterranean islands and the Atlantic facade of Europe. On the southeast side, the Atlanteans must have followed the retreat of the Green Sahara. A big group of Atlanteans must have relocated to Lower Egypt and built Heliopolis, the great sun city, as a rebirth in the east. The fond memories of their sweet homeland was faithfully preserved in religious traditions. In summary, the new finding presented in this video confirms the lineage of the Egyptian and European civilizations to the Atlantic civilization. It reveals how Atlanteans helped bridge the Green Sahara through farming on the Marsh of Reeds. Therefore, it also provides remedies for the Sahara and other broken water cycle systems.